They laughed, not politely, not quietly, but openly. In a polished conference room filled with glass walls and billion-dollar confidence, a young Filipino engineer stood in front of some of the most powerful developers in the Middle East, while his proposal lay untouched on the table. To them, it looked small, too careful, too different. And in a country racing to build the tallest, boldest skyline on Earth, his design seemed almost humble. What no one in that room understood was that they were laughing at the very blueprint that would one day save their most ambitious skyscraper from disaster.
This story does not begin with fame or wealth or influence. It begins with long nights, cramped apartments, and a man who learned early that being underestimated was not a curse, but a weapon. Born and educated in the Philippines, the engineer grew up surrounded by typhoons, earthquakes, flooding streets, and buildings that either survived or failed. While others studied architecture as art, he studied it as survival. Structures were not just meant to impress, they were meant to endure. That mindset would later clash violently with a region obsessed with record-breaking height.
By the time oil wealth began transforming the deserts of Saudi Arabia into forests of steel and glass, global firms were competing to leave their mark on the skyline. Bigger was better. Taller was everything. Designs emphasized vertical dominance, dramatic silhouettes, and visual impact. When the Filipino engineer submitted his proposal as part of an international consulting pool, it did not scream dominance. It whispered discipline, redundant load paths, wind shear mitigation, temperature-adaptive materials, features that added cost without adding obvious glamour. To executives chasing headlines, it felt unnecessary. One developer reportedly asked a question that cut deep. Why design for problems that may never happen? The engineer answered calmly, because gravity never negotiates, wind never gets tired, heat never shows mercy, and the ground beneath us remembers every mistake we make. His explanation earned nods from fellow engineers, but smiles from executives. In their eyes, he was cautious because he came from a country that built modestly. They wanted boldness, they wanted spectacle, and so his proposal was quietly shelved.
But blueprints have a way of surviving rejection. Months later, as construction plans evolved and reality began pushing back against ambition, problems emerged. Wind tunnel tests revealed dangerous oscillations. Thermal expansion stressed key joints. Costs ballooned as last-minute reinforcements were added. In search of solutions, a junior structural analyst revisited archived proposals. There, buried beneath flashier designs, was the Filipino engineer's work. Every problem they now faced had already been accounted for. Not abstractly, precisely, line by line, detail by detail. The adoption of the Filipino engineer's design did not happen with an announcement or an apology. It happened quietly, almost defensively. His wind-damping ratios appeared in revised calculations. His thermal expansion allowances slipped into updated material specs. His redundancy systems were reintroduced under different labels. No one spoke his name in meetings, but his thinking began shaping the building from the inside out. The skyscraper was changing course, not because pride allowed it, but because physics demanded it.
At first, the executives treated these changes as temporary safeguards, insurance, nothing more. But as construction climbed higher, the value of those decisions became impossible to ignore. Sections of the structure that followed his original logic required fewer emergency reinforcements. Stress readings stayed within predicted ranges even during extreme heat waves. While other towers in the region were quietly dealing with cracks, delays, and redesigns, this project moved upward with unusual calm. The building was behaving exactly as his model had promised.
Still, recognition did not come easily. In large-scale developments, credit often follows visibility, not contribution. The Filipino engineer remained an external consultant, rarely invited back to the table. Emails were forwarded, questions were filtered. His involvement was reduced to technical confirmations. Yet every confirmation strengthened trust in his work. Engineers on site began requesting his input directly, not because he was famous, but because his answers were consistently right.
He did not speak in dramatic visions. He spoke in margins of safety. Then came the moment every skyscraper dreads. A seasonal wind event stronger than any previously recorded for the area swept through the construction zone. Cranes were halted, sites were evacuated, monitoring systems lit up across the structure. In similar projects, this was the point where cracks appeared, joints failed, or timelines collapsed. But this tower did something unexpected. It flexed, it absorbed, it returned to equilibrium. The oscillation dampers behaved exactly as the Filipino engineer had calculated years earlier, back when his proposal had been dismissed as excessive.
After the winds passed, silence filled the control rooms. No alarms, no structural warnings, no damage reports. For the first time, the conversation shifted. Executives began asking not how tall the tower could be, but how close they had come to catastrophe without knowing it. And slowly, reluctantly, they traced the resilience back to its source. A design once laughed at had become the invisible backbone of their most ambitious project, and the man behind it could no longer be ignored. Recognition did not arrive with applause. It arrived with questions, quiet ones, asked behind closed doors. Executives who had once dismissed the proposal now wanted detailed explanations. Why did his wind mitigation system perform better at higher elevations? Why did his load redistribution reduce material fatigue instead of increasing it? The Filipino engineer answered patiently, not with defensiveness, but with clarity. He explained that extreme height magnifies small errors. What looks conservative at ground level becomes essential near the clouds.
For many in the room, this thinking felt unfamiliar. The prevailing culture of mega projects rewarded visible boldness, sharp angles, dramatic cantilevers, statements meant to be photographed. His philosophy was different. He designed for the day after the headlines faded, for years of heat cycles, for maintenance crews not yet hired, for storms not yet named. He believed that a building's greatest achievement was not how it looked when finished, but how quietly it performed decades later. That mindset came directly from his upbringing. In the Philippines, infrastructure lives under constant negotiation with nature. Earthquakes test foundations without warning. Typhoons expose weak assumptions overnight. Engineers there learn that optimism is dangerous. You assume the worst not because you lack confidence, but because you respect reality. The Filipino engineer carried that lesson with him into every calculation. He did not trust averages, he trusted extremes. And in the desert, extremes rule everything. As construction advanced toward completion, internal attitudes shifted. Younger engineers began studying his models. Senior engineers, sometimes reluctantly, that they had underestimated him. The project managers noticed something else as well. Long-term costs were stabilizing. Fewer corrective changes, fewer delays, fewer emergency consultations. What once looked like over-design was quietly saving millions, not in dramatic budget cuts, but in problems that never occurred. Eventually, his name returned to official documents, then to presentations, then to conversations with stakeholders. There was no public apology, but there was acknowledgement. The laughter was gone, replaced by a kind of professional respect that does not need words. The skyscraper was no longer just tall, it was resilient. And resilience, unlike spectacle, could not be faked. It had to be earned, one careful decision at a time. When the skyscraper finally reached completion, the world saw what it was meant to see: height, elegance, and modern ambition rising from the desert. Photographs captured its silhouette against the sky. Headlines celebrated national progress and engineering achievement. What the cameras could not capture was the invisible intelligence holding it together. The thousands of decisions embedded deep within its structure, many of them drawn directly from a proposal once dismissed, worked quietly every day without recognition. Inside the industry, however, the story traveled. Not loudly and not officially, but the way truth often does, through conversations between engineers, through case studies shared in conferences, through footnotes in technical papers. The Filipino engineer's approach became a reference point. His name appeared in discussions about resilience and long-term performance.
Young professionals from countries often overlooked in global megaprojects saw something powerful in his story, proof that insight is not limited by geography. For the engineer himself, the victory was subtle. There was no public spotlight, no viral announcement, but there was something more durable: trust. His phone began to ring more often. Invitations replaced rejections. He was asked not to justify caution, but to teach it. And each time he returned to a drawing board, he carried the same principle he always had, that the true measure of design is not applause, but endurance.
The skyscraper still stands today, absorbing wind, heat, and time with quiet confidence. People pass beneath it, unaware of the decisions that keep it steady. They do not know that its strength comes from a voice once laughed out of the room. And that is often how the most important contributions work. They are invisible. They do not demand attention. They simply refuse to fail. This story is not just about a building. It is about how innovation is often misjudged when it does not match expectations, about how voices from the margins are ignored until reality forces a second look, and about the danger of confusing confidence with correctness. Somewhere right now, another design is being laughed at in another room, and if history has taught us anything, it is this: the ideas that survive the longest are rarely the loudest, but they are always the most prepared.